Hey, 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 this is Seagrove, and I'm here with Joe from OmniPoke. Joe, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, as you said, I've got the YouTube channel OmniPoke, do Twitch as well for the same handle. A UK player that also does commentary as well from time to time. So yeah,
Yeah. And you got your invite in like a month or something like that?
yeah, I was one of the first in the world, but I haven't moved since then. I've just stayed on 250 the whole time.
That's all you need.
Yeah.
Um, Very cool. So, one of my friends at Memphis said I should make a video on when to scoop. And then I heard you talking about it. Well, I think you maybe made the stream before, but I didn't get to watch it until after, about scooping. And even once at Memphis, I definitely scooped later than I should have and ended up losing a round. I would have tied. But not that it would have mattered, but that's the way it went. So there's obviously a case by case, it's obviously a case by case thing. Um, but do you have any general rules or anything like that for when someone should scoop in a best of three?
I think there's definitely things that you need to be aware of as a player. So first of all, as you said, it's really like about what deck you're sort of playing. Does your deck inherently have good comeback mechanics? Like in current meta, there's things like Decidueye, which is typically better the longer the game progresses, just because of your ability. Then you think about more aggressive decks that are more like prize racy sort of things, where you have like Volcanion, where you'll rarely ever see a Volk player scooping because they're probably ahead in the game and they'll
Right,
probably get end out of the game, right? So if you're an aggressive deck, you're rarely thinking about scooping
right.
because you're hoping that in a game three situation, you're the aggressive deck. So if it's ever going to be some person's going to like cheese a win and take like donks, the aggressive deck will be the deck to do that most of the time.
And you're
So
probably
if
not
you're an
running out of
aggressive,
time, right?
yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. Well, there are some aggressive decks that still end up tying just because you still need to know like when you're behind
Okay,
as a aggressive deck, but typically that those are the decks that want to go to a game three because they'll have a higher chance of tie or win rather
okay.
than tie or lose. Um, but more slow progressive decks, you have to really be conscious of time. Things like Greninja, things like Decidueye, there has to be critical turns. That's always about how I think about it. Where Pokemon, although it is a prize race game to try and win the game, it's all about board state, right? You need
Right,
to know where your six prizes are coming and where your opponent's six prizes are coming if you're both trying to take prizes, which is most of the time.
right.
Uh, so you need to know, how many turns away are they from doing this, and how realistic it is for you to prevent them doing this. If it's
Okay.
becoming like a 3 or 4 percenter, you got to give up and you got to save yourself time.
Okay.
Um, a lot of the time, you're always sort of thinking about the time and whatever. Like wearing a watch is always a great tip, or
Yeah.
being aware of where a clock is around you. This is always something you need to be aware of. Um, and just always be aware of time and know that it's a best of three series and what's the best way for you to get a result. And sometimes you have to be aware that getting a win isn't a result that you can get,
Right.
and getting a tie is the best you can get.
Hmm.
And that's something you also have to be really aware of.
Okay. And you say that. Let me dive into that. So does that mean like you would not scoop when you know you're gonna lose?
Yeah. So again, it's down to time. If it's maybe been like 25 minutes and I'm in a bad spot and I think I can only tie, it depends how aggressive my deck is. Typically, I give myself enough time to play one more game out rather than play two more games out, right? So
Right.
you need to know that you have enough time that you can win the second game in a fortunate fashion or whatever to tie up the series, but not leave it too late that you can't win that game, but also not be so cautious that you end up winning game two and then suddenly you're in a game three spot and you could end up losing all over again. So
Right.
time management's really important. It's really down to your own deck, how you know it and how you know your opponent, and even how your opponent plays in game one can be a determinant factor because some players are naturally more aggressive.
Hmm.
Some people like going for like tempo Guzma plays or whatever, tempo early prizes just to start taking prizes as quickly as possible. Some
Right.
people are less focused on the board. Some people are very just inherently about prize cards,
Yeah.
and you need to pick up on those things. I think in game one situations.
Okay. And what do you mean by that? As in like they're not as, are you saying that they're too focused on prize and not focused on board state, so you can actually steal wins from them? Is that what you're saying?
Not necessarily that they're too focused on it, but some people will prioritize it. Like sometimes I find it a great trait. Sometimes I see people going for like aggressively just taking a Lele on a turn, and I'm like, whoa! I'm so surprised you didn't go for my main attacker here. Like it was
Yeah.
in range of a KO, you didn't go for it. But oftentimes there are decks now, especially with artillery as a support for a lot of decks. People just can get away with racing. Like Boswell's one of the decks that can just race,
Right.
and like it doesn't care what you're killing as long as you're killing 6 things or 3 things that cost 2 each.
Yeah.
You've won the game. So you just need to latch on to these sort of mentalities that your opponent will go for. Will they typically go for the board, or will they typically go for just racing?
Hmm.
And again, it's down to deck each time.
Oh, okay. In terms of speed for the later
Yeah.
games. Okay.
Because
So,
a lot of the time people will put themselves to 7 prizes because they want to, because of the board state. Like you'll see people Guzmering up Curliers even though they could kill a 2
right.
prize Pokemon on the turn because they're focused on the board at that time. Whereas other people are going, I want prizes right now because, I don't know, they're holding a Guzma or they can see their line to winning at the time.
Okay.
So people just naturally tend towards these things.
So I'm a super fast player. I tend to be a super fast player. In Daytona, I played Lapras,
Hmm.
and I played against Galissapod, and so in my mind, I was like, "There's 0% chance of me winning." And then I pull some like nice stuff. I had a Plasma Curum, and I'm like, I set up a KO on 2 Gallissapods with a Lapras, and I end up winning game 1. I was like, I can do this. And then I'm like, wait, no, I can't. I can't do this. I'm going to lose. So I just didn't scoop game 2
Yeah,
in hopes of tying
the series.
the series. What are your,
Yeah, yeah.
was that a good play, or should I have gone for the double win after that? Or for
Well, I mean,
one of 2?
you never go into a game 2 saying, "I hope I lose this." Right?
Right.
You're always going to try your lines, but as the game progresses, you'll feel like when you're ahead or behind in the
Right.
game most of the time.
Right.
Um,
I was
and
behind the whole time, and I was like,
Yeah.
I'm just not scooping. And
yeah. I've definitely been in the same situation. You can just promote your next Pokemon, draw, play your turn out. You
Yeah.
know you're not going to win, but you're just playing the stalling Guzma to
Yeah.
maybe get one more turn out for yourself
Exactly.
or whatever.
And I'm not saying like slow play. I'm just you continue
Completely
playing
allowed.
you just keep
Yeah.
playing the game.
As long as you're allowed to play the game, you can.
So is that what I should have been doing? Should I have been just like, once I realize I'm going to lose, be like, I'm probably going to lose the next game too?
If you're super unconfident that you'll win a third game, I think making a game 2 go as long as possible is in your own interest. Yeah.
That's what I did, but I'm like a super fast player anyways, and I got bodied in like 20 minutes, so it didn't matter. But that's what I was going for. Okay, so in terms of like, there are different rules for Swiss and for top 8. Is there any differences on scooping there?
So again, you'll oftentimes get more time in top 8.
Right.
So oftentimes it's more viable to try and conclude your games, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously there's the difference in Top Cut rules where if you're ahead by 4 prizes, that's what counts as a legitimate game, is it being completed.
Right.
Whereas in Swiss, someone has to take 6 prizes for the game to count. So that's not the case in top 8. So you have to be aware that the clocks will change. You'll have an hour or 75 minutes sometimes even. So typically that's enough time to conclude a series.
Mm-hmm.
There can still be slower decks, so it'll still come into play tie-ins. But typically I would say oftentimes you want to just conclude the game. So you want to conclude your best of 3 as most complete as possible. So if your game 2 is going poorly, unlike what we just said with the Lapras Glycopod, I think you'd probably concede and then go to a game 3, even though you're probably unfavored in the game 3 situation. If you make the game go longer, you'll still be unfavored in that game 3 because the game has to finish anyway.
Okay.
Like the third game will always conclude in a top cup situation, essentially.
Right. So you said 3 or 4 percenters when you're like, okay, I'm done. What
Yeah.
what are some keys looking at the board state to realizing like this is over? I
Uh,
think Russell said something like, if your game plan is I hope this end sticks, then you're probably not going to win. But are there any things that you see on the board where you're like, oh, this is it?
I mean, stuff like that, end-proofing mechanisms is going to be important, like knowing if they have artillery on the board or Orangaroo on board, how thick their deck size is, how
Hmm.
likely is this end going to stick in the first place. Oftentimes, um, there'll be turns where literally I top deck and I say, okay, my hand can't take me far enough to get me back into the game this turn. So whether that's I don't have an end in my hand, I can't deal with their attacker on their bench that's, going to sweep their last 3 or 4 prizes or whatever. If I can't deal with it that turn, that's when like if you want to scoop this game, that's when you should scoop, if that makes
Right.
sense.
Yeah.
If you don't want to scoop, you don't scoop. You just
Yeah.
keep playing. You do the suboptimal plays for as long as you can, right?
All right.
Um, but if you're inclined to scoop, you know that you need to scoop at this point. You need to basically distinguish. Yeah, I personally go back to board state, go back to prizes. Like maybe you've dropped one prize and you're like a slower deck anyway. Don't start thinking about scooping at this point unless there's literally like 20 minutes on the clock and you want to win the series rather than just tie the series,
Right.
right? Um, I've seen people like rage quit games when they have like 20 minutes left and they miss Tillman Bridget. And weirdly, like that can be right if you think that you want to win the game.
Right.
Um, just because you don't want to sort of go down bumbling along and get to a tie when you really shouldn't have tied. So even though you can see like stupid rage quit style plays, they can still be right in the long run. So
Yeah.
it can be as early as turn one, as long as like it's more about the clock itself. But board state is obviously the thing that you have to follow a lot of the time.
My only tie in Memphis, I was playing the mirror, and he Bridgeted turn one, game one, and went first. And
Mm.
I didn't get Bridget turn one, and I was like, I should probably just scoop here, but I couldn't convince myself to do it.
Right,
But
right.
you're probably right there.
It can be
Um,
right at times. Especially because Bridget itself is such a power swing card with so many evolution decks. Like
right.
it's so swingy. Your win percentage is so drastically different when you have a turn one Bridget and when you don't oftentimes. So
Yeah.
it can be decided that early in the game, really.
What about? Did you get to see any of Memphis?
I've seen like 3 or 4
Did you
games.
see the finals?
Yeah.
Okay, so in the finals, it was Galissapod Garb against Zoroark Lycanroc, and Pram is down 6-2 game one, and he didn't scoop. I was like, I probably would scoop at this point, and he comes back and wins it. Um,
Hmm.
I think I would have scooped in the moment, but there's specific reasons why it was correct to play it out, and obviously it worked out. What do you want to go into why that was the play?
Well, you could see that there were still outs for him. There was still a lot that Azul had to do on his following turn to win the game. Like,
Hmm.
although he was down to just 2 prizes to end the game, I think he'd used his GX attack at that point. So it was always going to be like a 2-hit KO style kind of thing, as long as Pram could keep his Lycanrocs out of the way, basically. So he had to try and deny Azul's hand size as much as possible, deny his outs to take his final two. So
Hmm.
um, making him set up a new attacker, making him find a Guzma in addition to finding an energy attachment, having like a combination of cards rather than just giving up and saying, you're close enough to the game, let's have a game two. But again, it goes back to this is specifically in a finals now. This is, you have as much time as possible really to complete the series. Both players are playing relatively aggressive decks. They both have prize denial elements to them with Ace of Rollers and whatnot, but
Hmm.
I think it's generally quite a back and forth exchange between those two archetypes. So I think they're both comfortable that there's probably going to be 3 games in the series. So it doesn't really feel like Pram's gaining anything from literally giving himself 0%.
Right.
I think he was close enough in the series to continue the game for sure.
Yeah. Also, I think Galissapod Garbodor, one of its big problems is it gets that garb out and then late game ends can.
Yeah. And Glycopod as an attacker itself, it always needs to combine with something. It needs to have a Guzma follow-up or an Acerola follow-up or a DCE follow-up at the very least.
Right.
And these are all reduced counts as the game's progressed. So denying those sorts of things can leave a Glycopod literally stranded in the active, just hitting for 30 or whatever. So.
All right, great. Is there anything else that you want to add? Any specific tips or anything for people who are trying to learn and trying to teach themselves and admit to themselves when to scoop in a best of 3?
I mean, I'm still like, although I've been here talking about it a lot, I've had a lot of experiences of tying myself. I think one of the last regionals I went 5-0-4 actually, and I started off the day at 0-0-3. I was playing Foxy Dramper against. I actually played 3 Desi Tails in a row, and I knew going into the tournament because I was actually testing those 2 decks the most for the tournament. So I knew the matchup always went long, and it was so hard for me to try and regulate my own time in those sorts of matchups because Decidueye Tails is such a swingy deck, or was at the time, just because of Forest, and it was a combo deck basically at the time.
Right.
So there are definitely times where it's super hard to manage your time, and I know a lot of the times you can be retroactive and think, man, if I skipped 5 minutes earlier, I win here.
Right.
But I think you really can't beat yourself up about it a lot of the time because there's just so many factors in Pokemon. It's still so RNG based that there'll be times where you scoop early, you think it's the right thing, you dead draw and you lose. That also happened to me in Bremen, where I was up against a Rainbow Force deck, and I was playing Xerneas Break. So weird. The first game of 2 Xerneas against each other.
Awesome.
I win like a pretty... So I'm in a commanding position in game 1, and I play quickly to end the game, because I think I can never lose the game if I win my first one fairly quickly. I think I can either 2-0 him, or I'll lose if he gets like aggressive elixirs and I can't get my Geomancy off.
Right.
And then I'll win game 3 because I go first, I can do my Bridget and all that shenanigans. I end up winning pretty quickly and then just getting donked. So like there are stuff.
I think I remember that.
You just can't you can't account for these sorts of things, no matter how much you try and keep an eye on the time. And there'll always be things that you look back on and think it's wrong, but if you think it's right at the time, that's what the main thing is, really.
Okay. I actually do have one last question. For newer players who are having trouble finishing games because they're still learning the game and they're just not able to play quickly yet, is there any advice for them?
It's a hard one. It depends on how new they are, really. I think just getting to know your own deck is probably the factor that you'll always get the most out of newer players. Typically, if you're a newer player, it's way better to learn one deck for like a month or 2 rather than jumping all around the place, because you'll find like patterns within your own deck and you'll see sequences that have come up in the past for you. So you won't encounter as many hands that you just don't know what to do with. So typically, if you sort of encounter hands that you've already dealt with previously, although each situation is sort of different in its own right, I think you'll naturally just sort of see these situations come up, and essentially you'll see the best line of play to go for. And no one plays slowly when they know the best line to go for.
Right.
People only slow down when they have no idea what they're trying to do this turn.
Right.
So as long as you know what you're trying to accomplish in the turn, that's when you can play at a reasonable pace throughout any game. So I think pretty much knowing your deck inside out is always the best policy for newer players, I would say. And that'll just naturally help you with time issues.
Okay, very cool. Well, thank you so much for your time. Do you have any shout-outs or anything you'd like to give?
We went for a bunch of them at the start, but yeah, the OmniPoke YouTube channel, Pokemon TCG_EU for those European streams, if there are any more in the future.
Hey.
Team OmniPoke on Twitch, and there's also Complexity Card Gaming on Facebook as well, part of my sponsors, so they're awesome.
All right, well, thank you so much for your time, and keep killing it on YouTube and all your social media. Thank you.